Namaste, everyone. I feel a little bit out of my depths here. I'm trying to speak on power of storytelling to a bunch of authors and publishers. My father used to say it's like trying to sell ice to the Eskimos. You all know the power of storytelling. But I'm just going to share authentically what has been my experience with stories right from a very, very young age. So I grew up in India, born and raised, and my parents were priests, Hindu, living in a temple, growing up with these incredible epics, which many of you might be familiar with, like the Ramayana or the Mahabharata, the various Puranas, Itihasas. Our Indian culture is replete with stories. Not just some stories, the entire Vedic culture hinges on this idea of, like Empathy Labs was really beautifully highlighting, that when we tell a story, it just goes much deeper into the brain, doesn't it? You could read something, you could have a conversation about it, you could have so many various inputs, but when it's elaborated in story format, there's just some transformation that takes place. It is said that these stories have a spiritual vibration. Everything in life, you hearing my voice, is a vibration. We're interacting, and that is a vibration. That's an exchange of energy. That is the mindset of this ancient wisdom, that everything around us is actually energy. Whether it be just us eating, us living our daily routine, or hearing a story. Everything in the Vedic culture begins with Shravanam, begins with hearing, because that is the first step in transformation. So just from a very young age, whether it's a child, a teenager, person in love, person betrayed, you can think of a number of variety of situations. It's pretty much all ticked in the various stories that are available. And this dates back to at least 5,000 years ago. So it's a little bit almost unnecessary to explain the power of storytelling, because it's in our DNA. So I really feel like some of you might be feeling it. Yes, obviously that we've been hearing tales about Prahlad or Arjuna since the early days. At least I grew up with it. And but I went through different phases. My mother is Caucasian. She's from America. So I'm a bit of a half-caste, as you guys like to call us. But so I went through a phase where I started doubting the validity or the use of these old stories. What's the point? That was thousands of years ago. We've moved on. We're more advanced. We're more civilized. We don't really need these old tales to tell us who we are or how to live our life. And so I went off to university and went to America I was in Los Angeles, California for about a decade. And I studied the sciences because I wanted to get to grips with reality. I didn't want to be stuck in the stories of yore. And I realized that it wasn't so much that it's instructing us how to live your life. It's not a demand on our psyche. It's not meant to be these stories, these ancient historical events that have been passed down for generations were not this oppressive, controlling presence in my life. That's what I had the feminist in me had told myself, that, well, I'm going to rid myself of all this, the bondage of tradition. And so when I got to America, I was very happy to experience the freedom of modern life. But slowly, as my evolution of the stories and narratives that I had heard in my life, as that evolved, I was able to appreciate that actually we tell stories because we want to give the best of ourselves. When I heard the book launches of these wonderful creative endeavors and a real revelation of our heart with the book of Not by Choice, what is it? Not by chance, but by choice?
By choice, not by chance.
I love that title. Yes, that we're trying to give the best of us, isn't it? It's a gift. Our stories that we share is a little piece of our heart, a little piece of our life. And so anytime I hear a story now, I'm wondering, why is it being told? Are you writing this book to like control the alcoholics and make sure they don't ever, cause a ruckus in society and let's get them off the streets? And no, you're sharing this story because you felt a transformation and a deep value in your life. So when I revisited a lot of these ancient stories with that mindset that actually, I think they're trying to help us. I think there's a lesson that is ageless, timeless, eternal. My entire worldview shifted. Because when I got to America, I didn't see the paradise that I was promised. I mean, I lived in Hollywood for about 10 years on the banks of Hollywood. And not to, minimize the experience there. Everyone's having a good time, sure. But is there the level of contentment that I was maybe striving for or hoping for? That was a little bit of a disappointment in my own experience. It might be different for other people. So I had to revisit, what are the values? What are the experiential narratives that I will allow now to enter into my psyche? What are the stories that I accept? Because we're always accepting stories, whether it's ancient stories or modern stories, whether it's the Russian story or the Ukrainian story. We are accepting narratives at every moment, whether we're aware of it or not. So in an attempt to free myself from my the old narratives, I had accepted a new narrative. But that necessarily didn't work for me. I'm just speaking from my experience. So my only great point that I'd like to share here is analyzing what is the transformation that our story is meant for. What is it that what we are experiencing, what we are seeking, and what we are sharing? I have 4 children now, and I have become a firm believer in this power of storytelling. And I start with ancients, because like Empathy Labs, was it Craig? He was explaining that when you hear these stories of empathy, it actually translates to real life empathy. And that's just one of the wonderful traits that I was gifted as a young child in the form of stories. There's a young Prahlad. He has so much faith in his Lord, in his best friend. That story moves me to the core about values of trust and faith, because there's absolutely zero fear in him, and he's 5 years old. So when I tell that story to my children, I can see the little light bulbs go off that, oh, he's not even afraid to die? Huh, well, what must that feel like? That there's no fear of death? That there's no fear of this big, powerful, demonic force? It actually starts changing the clogs inside. And then there's Dhruva, and there's the stories just keep going on. You could read them for years. Over time, you can actually visualize the transformation in character, the change that the child is actually experiencing from the narratives that we're gifting them. So I would firmly reiterate that one day I would like to write my own stories. There's many authors here, and I look up to you all. But my greatest lesson for me has been that if we are experiencing the transformation, then we can pass on that transformation. But if we're not really experiencing it, then there's what we're sharing might not have that same vibration, the powerful vibration that we hope to confer. So, in essence, what is it? What is it in our authenticity, in our life lived experience that we want to pass on, that we want to share as a medium of this sound vibration, power of storytelling? So I would just like to leave you with the idea that whatever the story might be, if we've actually grown up with it, it probably has a little bit more power than we imagine. I have come to accept that old is gold because it really works in my life. And that to not have this stigma against the tales that we've been told, the historical events and the figures in our own culture, that we can break away from, this colonial mindset maybe that somehow the ancient cultures, the indigenous cultures were backward or uneducated or somehow limited. There's a lot of stigma that I myself held until, I had a completely different perspective of it. So my little my little sharing about the power of storytelling is that we can revisit these thousands of years old stories and pass them on to our children so that they can actually have tools and narratives that are actually not necessarily bound by the current situations itself. Because there's certain things that we're going through which are definitely eternal. So what is the spiritual real life hero that we're passing on? We are all living a story. Every single day of our life is part of our story. And our children will be experiencing our life in the form of spiritual story vibration. I might be getting a bit esoteric here, but what the child takes from the parent is spiritual inspiration as well as just obviously the mundane. Of course, we can be doctors and lawyers and all those career successes, but what is it that we are able to practice and experience in our own spiritual identity that we can pass on to the child, because that's much more deeply rooted. The Sanskrit word is sat. Sat is that which is eternal, which is everlasting, which is unchanging, and therefore anchors the spiritual identity. So, what is the story that we're living? What is the story that we are passing on to our children? And where are our spiritual heroes? Just as we have material career heroes, political heroes, literary heroes, what is our spiritual anchor? And where are our spiritual heroes for the children? That would be a question that I would ask myself when I write my book. Thank you very much.